Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson had a dialogue recently. I find it fascinating watching these two different ways of approaching reality and two different mentalities about religious questions sort of clashing. You have a psychologist and a scientist, an emphasis upon myths and symbols versus an emphasis upon facts and data, the right brain versus the left brain, and so forth. Unfortunately to me, and I don't think I'm alone in this either, it felt like they were on different wavelengths and they didn't quite get close enough. You know, any conversation, you want to have some differences and some similarities. If you're totally different, you can't connect at all. If you're totally similar, there's no interesting clash. But here they just were approaching things in such a different way. Jordan Peterson is going on and on about memes and stories and psychological meaning and so forth. And Richard Dawkins is just sort of saying, I don't know what to do with that, you know, and even in the discussion, they're sort of recognizing we just think very differently.
The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different and at many, many, many levels.
I think we just have to agree that we have different kinds of minds, and you're interested in symbols and I'm interested in facts.
God bless Alex O'Connor for moderating a discussion like that. Not an easy task. It seems to me that the best way to pursue truth will involve humility about these kinds of differing temperaments, especially about religious questions. Some of you watching this right now may relate more to Jordan Peterson, others to Richard Dawkins, others to neither. But whatever our approach, I think we do well to ask, what can we learn from looking at these alternative ways of sort of approaching religious questions? So real quick, fun video. Let's take 4 lessons here that we'll work through. Number 1, those of us like myself, I'm a Christian, who want to defend religion need to be willing to extend into the left brain territory of rational analysis. The facts matter. Questions of historicity in the Bible matter. Many people right now are drawn to faith because of Jordan Peterson's approach, and there's so much, you know, I really enjoy listening to him. I've learned a lot from his discussions about different symbolical aspects to the biblical stories and so forth. But when you're talking to a Richard Dawkins, we have to go further than just that. And at times, whether it's intentional or not, other people experience Jordan Peterson's answers on religious questions to be evasive. You know, you get the sense that at times people are just sort of saying, just give me a straight answer.
I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
When Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth, you started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, you know, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
This comes up in the discussion as well when they're talking about Cain and Abel.
You must know. I know this comes up all of the time when somebody says, but did Cain and Abel really exist? And I know that you want to say that the story which
I think it's a silly question. I think it's like asking whether Raskolnikov existed in Crime and Punishment.
But there's a difference here because Crime and Punishment is a work of fiction, and the Bible portrays itself as, on some level, certainly more than Dostoevsky, interested in history. So it makes at least some historical claims. Now, not everything in the Bible is literal or historical. There's poetry and so forth, but at least there's some history in the Bible, and that makes it different from Dostoevsky. 2 of the issues that come up in this dialogue are the virgin birth of Christ and the resurrection of Christ. These are 2 core Christian doctrines. They're in the Apostles' Creed. They've been believed on by Christians all throughout church history, and they have huge implications for the right brain, but it's also fair to ask from a left brain standpoint. By the way, the right brain, left brain, everybody knows this, right? Right brain is more imaginative, interested in questions of artistry and the aesthetics and value. Left brain is more rational and hard-edged and so forth. Although people question this all the time, and it's kind of disputed, so let's not don't nail that down too much. It's kind of controversial, I guess. But the point is, it's fair to ask questions from a left brain analysis about these religious beliefs, these historical events, and this is what Dawkins is doing.
That has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies.
Do you mean
And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a
Is
form
it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
So they go round and round on this about the virgin birth for a while, which we'll come back to at the end of the video. But watch this clip. Ultimately, Alex is kind of helpfully pressing Jordan Peterson a bit again, and finally a clear answer emerges.
I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well,
It's a
Jesus
different
had an
kind of
earthly
question.
father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he
That's
wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
Now we'll come back to the virgin birth, but first here's a second lesson, kind of going in the opposite direction. People who want to attack religion and reject religion, if they want their attack to be compelling to others, need to be willing to enter into the realm of right brain values. I know this is basic, but this doesn't happen a lot in again, these conversations happen on different wavelengths a lot because we're coming from different standpoints. We're not really listening to different ways of approaching these questions. In this dialogue, Richard Dawkins rejects belief in miracles as just preposterous. It's just ridiculous. It's just like his dialogue with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, where I did a video on that, and he's constantly saying, it's obvious nonsense. It's almost sort of endearing. You just see very clearly where he's coming from. So in this dialogue, he's repeating this and he's saying, I'm interested in truth. I'm not interested in that. I care about if it actually happened. I want evidence and facts and so forth. But as I see things, this mentality is at best a failure to consider alternative right brain ways of looking at the world, and at worst, a form of prejudice. One of the things that I think Jordan Peterson gets right in this dialogue is that there is no purely evidential, fact-based approach to reality. None. We are all finite, and so values will always organize which facts we focus upon and how we interpret them.
We see the world of facts through something that, when described, is a story, because we have to prioritize our perceptions. We have to prioritize facts. And as far as I can tell, a story is a verbal account of how our perceptions and the facts that we encounter are prioritized. So, for example, when you go see a movie, the movie has a hero, and what the writers do is they show you how the hero prioritizes his perceptions, what he attends to, and how he acts, and you derive from that the story of his life and his ethic.
This is a point that Kierkegaard, by the way, made really well constantly against Hegel. He has a simple principle that's so profound and so relevant, and that is the way we know things is determined by the fact that we're existing individuals. And, oh man, well, let's not get into that too much, but it's relevant to this. The very idea that we take a fact-based, more left-brain approach to reality is itself not a fact, but it functions more like a story with certain values. I think if Richard Dawkins was honest and consistent, he would admit that his own approach to truth isn't purely fact-based and evidential and so forth. I've read through The God Delusion, his book. I know what he has to say in response to the fine-tuning argument, and that is he appeals to a multiverse. A multiverse also takes us away from the empirical realm, from truth that can be tested scientifically. He also has very strong moral convictions, which also take us out of the realm of fact and into the realm of value, and that came up in this dialogue.
Do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
For example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
At that point, Richard Dawkins goes on to list a bunch of the vices that he perceives in fundamentalist Islam, but that really misses the point. What Jordan Peterson is asking is not just what are the bad things, can you mention them, but why are they bad? There's a value system being put forward here. This is not an obvious fact. Not all human beings have agreed upon that. It's totally fair for Jordan Peterson to ask a hierarchy that points to what? So the point is just simply that it's harder to stay in the land of left-brain rational analysis and think, oh, the virgin birth, obvious nonsense, once you see that this also is going to endanger things like the humanitarian values that you just take for granted. And discovering that makes you a little bit more open. And so the point is, simple point, but I think it's needed. The right brain approach and the left brain approach, even knowing that's a clumsy way of articulating the difference, and we don't even want to assume everybody's in one of those two, these different approaches need to listen to each other more in the quest for truth. More humility and more dialogue and more, like Atticus Finch in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, realizing there's different ways of looking at the world. Lesson number 3, the meaning and the miracles of Christianity cannot be separated. So stepping back and looking at the picture, the big picture here, we might say that Jordan Peterson is more interested in the meaning of the biblical story, and Richard Dawkins is more interested in the miracles and whether they really happened. And I think a takeaway from this discussion, for me personally, a lot of this is just me reflecting for myself, is that you really can't separate the meaning and the miracles. Those of us who agree with Peterson that there's a transcendent meaning to the biblical story must simply make peace with the fact that that will involve embracing the miracles as well. It's a package deal. You can't just pluck out the meaning and leave the miracles off the table or say, I don't know about those, I'm not sure, but I want the meaning, but I don't want those. And I think we just need to make peace with the fact that the Richard Dawkins of the world will maybe sneer at us, and that's fine. We just embrace that. We embrace the miraculous element. This was the whole argument of this book, J. Gresham Machen's Christianity and Liberalism, 100 years ago, addressing a similar thing. The liberal Protestants at that time who were saying we can remove the miraculous elements of the Bible and still retain the meaning of it. And he was saying, no, when you do that, you lose what is actually at the core of the religion, what makes it distinctive. And his great insight that I think is so profound is that actually turns Christianity from a religion of grace into a religion of liberalism. It makes it from the imperative mood, or makes it into the imperative mood, what you have to do, rather than the triumphant indicative mood. And the reason for that is if you lose the miracles, you no longer have this core message of a God who comes down in the person of Jesus Christ to save us and to bring love and forgiveness. That's what Christianity is. That's the basic core gospel message. There is a God. There's been a problem in our relationship with God. Jesus came to fix that problem, okay? Putting it in colloquial terms, that's the basic idea. If you lose the miracles, you lose that narrative. Basically, what you're left with is a set of ideals. And so at that point, it does become something to strive after, not something that has been done for you. You lose the gracious character of this religion. And that is something I think you see emphasized in Jordan Peterson's emphasis upon responsibility and building our way to heaven and so forth. And my hope for Jordan Peterson, God bless him, is that he'll keep moving as he's thinking and basically come to fully embrace the historicity of what he's exploring, as well as come to understand its gracious character. It's not us building up to God. The ultimate truth is God has come down to us, and that's what Jesus is all about. Lesson number 4. This is the appeal to anyone, I would say, who's thinking this through and wrestling with this. It's rational to believe in the miracles. I'm not saying it's rational to believe in every miracle, but just to believe in the possibility of miracles is very rational. A great case for this comes in C.S. Lewis's older book, Miracles. He's doing a great job in this book, evening the playing field. What he's basically showing is that the question of miracles simply kicks back to the question of whether there's anything supernatural, such as God or gods or anything like that. He says, if we decide that nature is not the only thing there is, then we cannot say in advance whether she is safe from miracles or not. There are things outside her. We do not yet know whether they can get in. The gates may be barred or they may not. This mentality seems to me to be very reasonable and more just sort of open to truth. So then and then what he's doing in that book is making a case against naturalism, which is the idea that only nature exists, and in favor of supernaturalism, which means we should just follow the empirical evidence however it leads. And this seems to me to be a very reasonable way to think, that if God exists, miracles are possible, and the question of God's existence has some pretty strong testimonies, like the fine-tuning argument. Therefore, we should be sort of open-minded about miracles. And if you come across a miracle like the resurrection of Christ, which seems to have some pretty compelling historical evidence that makes it at least plausible, then it's rational to believe that. Even if you think that's just a possibility, it is worth exploring more. If you're interested more in the fine-tuning argument, by the way, I did a video on this over the summer you can check out. Trent Horn did a video on this recently on his channel you could check out. Oh, there's some good dialogues that Richard Dawkins himself has been a part of on that argument you could also check out. I'll put a link to those 3 things in the video description. What did you think of the dialogue? Did you come away with something completely different than me? This is basically this is my personal takeaway is, okay, wow, 2 very different approaches to questions of religious truth. Okay, what do we learn from that? And those are my thoughts. What are yours? Also, by the way, did you know that Truth Unites has a website? This is my YouTube channel, but it's also a broader ministry that I do a lot of things. I got posts on there. I got a speaking request form. I got lots of things on there. If you're interested in learning more about Truth Unites, that's a great place to go. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good day.